one of the most fundamental values we hold as Americans is that our government ought to be open and transparent, that it ought to be of and by and for the people.
Candidate Obama pledging during the 2008 campaign that his White House would not play politics as usual. And it's time now for our Sunday group. Bill Kristol of the Weekly Standard, Cece Connolly of the Washington Post, former State Department official Liz Cheney, and Juan Williams from National Public Radio. So, the Sestak affair, I like that name. The White House attempt to get Congressman Joe Sestak to drop out of the Democratic primary to clear the way for Arlen Specter. And we found out, talk about truth being stranger than fiction, we found out on Friday that they used former President Clinton to offer Sestak an unpaid appointment to a presidential advisory board. Bill Kristol, was it illegal? Was it improper? Was it dumb?
We don't know what the it is because they say that was the offer that was being made, even though Congressman Sestak had said for months that he was offered a job, quite a senior job, in the Obama administration. Joe Sestak is an experienced man in politics, and in Washington, he was a two-star, three-star, I guess, admiral, and then a congressman. He knows what a senior job is, and he knows that being on some advisory committee is not a senior job, especially when congressmen were ineligible for the advisory committee he was allegedly approached by. So I think the White House has a huge credibility problem.
I think there are also some still real unanswered questions here. And the biggest one, of course, is what exactly did President Obama know and when did he know it? I mean, his response in the news conference just saying, well, nothing improper occurred. Well, gosh, that almost raises more questions in my mind. So far, from what we've seen, we know this is not unprecedented. Governor Rendell actually made sort of a remarkable acknowledgement in your interview, Chris, saying, oh, yes, I did a similar thing a few years back. So it's certainly politics as usual, but as your clip illustrates, that becomes a political problem for the White House.
Liz, during the Bush-Cheney years, Republicans complained about the criminalization of politics, as I pointed out, with Governor Rendell, when Democrats made a big deal about the firing of the 8 U.S. attorneys, as Democrats complained during the Clinton administration. Should the GOP break the cycle and not make a federal case of this?
No, look, I think there are some things that clearly rise to the level of needing independent investigation. And what you've had happen here, obviously, is the White House put out a statement on the Friday before Memorial Day announcing that Bill Clinton had been involved, which I'm sure was really not that reassuring to most Americans. I mean, there's not exactly an impeccable record of integrity there on the part of the former president. But secondly, then you had Rahm Emanuel basically have his own lawyer, the White House counsel, issue a statement saying, hey, this is all fine, we're good to go, with no analysis whatsoever. Clearly, you need somebody to come in and take a look at exactly what happened.
What specifically bothers you the most? What is the thing that you really want to see independently investigated?
You know, there's a lot here that just smells funny. If the White House, in fact, thought that what they were doing was above board, why did they go to Bill Clinton? Why did they need a cutout for whatever they were doing? I want to know what he offered. I want to know what the president knew. The president says he didn't know. I find it really hard to believe that the chief of staff would go to a former president to get him to try to get somebody out of the race without telling the president of the United States. And finally, this is very reminiscent of the campaign finance scandals back in the mid-90s when they were selling the Lincoln bedroom. And so I think the American people have a right to know here. We got Rahm Emanuel, Bill Clinton back engaged in this, exactly what happened, were any laws broken, what offer was made.
Juan?
I listen to all this. I just got to say, there's gambling in the casino, politics in Washington. Imagine that. I mean, even Republicans. You said Michael McCasey, former Attorney General, says, no, it's nothing here in terms of legal action. That's basically what he says.
He said he thinks the public integrity section of the Department of Justice ought to investigate.
He said basically that, it's highly questionable whether anything happened. And then you go back and you listen to people who have been in ethics positions, like Richard Painter, who was in the Bush administration. He says he doesn't think anything happened. I saw Ron Kaufman, who was quoted. Ron Kaufman says, this is politics as usual, going back to George Washington.
We don't know what happened, so
you
can't say whether it was legal or not.
Even the independent watchdog groups are saying, you know what, this is what happens. This is horse trading in Washington.
Can I say something about that? I mean, it is not politics as usual. I was the chief of staff to the vice president. You get an ethics briefing on the first day that you become a senior staff member in the White House. Rahm Emanuel got that briefing. Jim Messina, the deputy chief of staff, who was reported credibly by the Denver Post in a very detailed story to have called up Andrew Romanoff,
former House Speaker
in Colorado, to get him out of the race against Michael Bennet out of a Democratic primary, gets that same briefing. in that briefing, one thing I remember 20 years later is stressed. You cannot be involved in quid pro quos. You cannot ask someone for his vote and say in return you will get a job. You cannot ask someone. You can't ask someone for anything. I'm sorry. I'm about to go on. You cannot ask anyone for anything in return for a job. And if someone approaches you, yes, you were supposed to say, "I'm sorry, we cannot." That is illegal.
Bill, let me get this straight. So when ambassadorships, when people make campaign contributions and end up as ambassador to Bermuda,
yes, that is correct.
When
they may
people
expect
make deals inside the party.
Wait, we have our one at a time. Go ahead,
let me finish.
quickly.
When LBJ and President Kennedy...
You interrupted me to say, let me finish. I was letting you talk.
That's unusual. But when LBJ and JFK make a deal to run as a ticket and not run against each other, when Eisenhower says to Earl Warren, I'm going to make you Supreme Court Justice...
White House staff members are given an ethics briefing, and I want to see what the briefing said, what briefing Rahm Emanuel and Jim Messina did. It isn't petting.
No, now it's Bill's turn.
I'm not picking on President Obama. I'm picking on Rahm Emanuel and Jim Messina. They're the people who are covered by this law. They need to come. Neither has said a word. They need to just say, what was the conversation you had? Mr. Emanuel, what did you say to President Clinton? Mr. Messina, what did you say to Andrew Romanoff? It is also
interesting, I have to point out, that Bauer, in his statement, says that efforts were made in June and July, and yet they talk about a 30-second phone call, a 30-second conversation in a phone call between Clinton and Sestak, which, unless it was happening on June 30th at about 11:59:45, couldn't have taken 2 months.
Clinton's a diversion. The issue is Rahm Emanuel and Jim Messina, who are on the public payroll and who have strict ethics rules guiding them. They simply need to say what they did say. They need to now say publicly what they said and what they didn't say.
Wait. Cece, I want to ask you one question. We've only got about a minute left in this segment. Barack Obama, and we had the clip, and we've been playing, and everybody's been playing clips, campaign, new kind of politics. How much does this damage his brand?
Well, I think that's the important issue here, Chris, because really, in a matter of weeks, I imagine that most Americans are going to forget who Joe Sestak is or was, or maybe he'll become a senator, or what Bill Clinton may or may not have said in a telephone call. But this adds to the general sense of business as usual.